Welcome back to Hardball. With a Russian investigation posing a looming threat to President Trump, Democrats say it looks like Trump is attempting to pick his own prosecutors. Anyway, that's because, according to Politico, quote, Trump has personally interviewed at least 2 potential candidates for U.S. attorney positions in New York, a move that critics say raises questions about whether they can be sufficiently independent from the president. Well, President Trump is considering the candidates for the eastern and southern districts of New York State, the latter of which has jurisdiction over Trump Tower. And while a president has the power to nominate U.S. attorneys, they typically do not interfere or interview prospective candidates. He does. As Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal told Politico, for him to be interviewing candidates for that prosecutor who may in turn consider whether to bring indictments involving him and his administration seems to smack of political interference. That's Senator Blumenthal. Documents show that the president also met with the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia before nominating her to the post. I'm joined right now by the author of that story in Politico, Sungmin Kim, and also Joyce Vance, a former U.S. Attorney. Sungmin, thank you and congratulations. I didn't know this. I don't know. Can you tell us how you found this out?
Oh, well, thank you so much for the compliments of the story.
I want to know your trade crafts. How did you find out that Trump's out there personally meeting with candidates to be U.S. attorney, prosecutor in New York, where it affects all his business affairs, and in D.C., which affects any possible obstruction of justice? And they're the only ones he seems to be interested in.
Well, the one part I can talk about is that the Senate Judiciary Committee, which these nominees do have to go through in order to get confirmed, has been asking the U.S. attorney candidates who have been formally nominated, who did you meet with regarding your nomination? Did you meet with anyone from the White House? So with Ms. Jessie Liu, who was nominated for the District of Columbia position earlier this year, back in June, when she had submitted her QFR's questions for the record back to the committee, that was when we learned about the meeting.
Where do these names, I mean, I'm not, do they come from the Bar Association, the Federalist Society for Republicans? And where did candidates for U.S. attorney come from?
So
how does the president know who to even think about?
So traditionally, a lot of it is based in consultation with their home state senators. That's why.
How about if they're Democrats?
That's why that does get interesting with the New York positions, considering there are 2 Democratic senators there. But it traditionally, White Houses work with the 2 home state senators, who then in turn work with their local legal communities. A lot of these states have different commissions that recommend people to come up with what they call a consensus list of nominees.
Okay, let me go to Joyce on this. What do you make of the President of the United States vetting candidates for prosecutor?
You know, it's a terrible idea, Chris. It may not violate a law that we can point to, but politics and prosecutions don't mix. And this is a slippery slope to eroding the Justice Department's independence. This is the type of process that you would expect to see an attorney general push back strongly against, suggesting to the president that nothing good happens when the public starts to have questions about the independence.
So it's Sessions' job, it's Sessions' job to tell him, you think, don't do this.
You know, you wouldn't normally expect to see a president do this. It's a long-standing tradition in both Democratic and Republican administrations that there's no contact.
Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said on Wednesday that he didn't remember whether the interviews had taken place. He defended Trump's right to meet with prospective candidates. Here he is.
I'm not sure I remember whether he had interviewed for New York, but if you say so, assume so. And he has the right to, for sure, because he has to make an appointment. And I assume that everybody would understand that.
Well, Sungmin, let's start with you then, Joyce. It seems to me that every one of these candidates, potential U.S. attorneys, knows what Trump did with James Comey. They read the papers. I assume they're cognizant of the reality. They know that Trump vetted to see if he was a loyalist, whether he was going to defend him as head of the FBI. They walk into the room with the president. They know the question that's implicitly on his mind. Are you going to be with me?
I mean,
Isn't that already tainted?
We don't really know the contents of, especially with the ones that we reported on. We don't know kind of the contents of that discussion just yet. I will know.
But we do know what they knew going in.
Well,
they knew going in that the president had vetted James Comey on his loyalty.
I will note, though, that with the D.C. prosecutor candidate, who was confirmed unanimously earlier this year, so Democrats did not end up throwing up objections against her nomination. When Democrats did a follow-up questionnaire, they asked her very specific questions. Did anyone talk to you about any current ongoing investigations into the cabinet, into the Trump family, into the administration? She said none of that was raised.
Joyce, what do you make of this? Because there is a context. Sure. Candidates for U.S. attorney know what's going on politically. They're political people, most of them. And they know the president wants to know whether you're loyal or not, because he went through this whole process with James Comey. And when he didn't get the right answers from Comey, he sacked him. So they're walking into these interviews knowing this.
And that's absolutely the problem here. Even if nothing wrong took place in these sorts of interviews, the public will question, right? The press will question.
I'm questioning it.
And we don't really have the kind of
If they
faith
don't bring
that we should
charges
have.
against Trump on something like his business relations and his tax returns and all the rest, and it'll look spooky. They'll go, wait a minute, he already picked the ones he wanted. He picked his judge.
Prosecutors need to serve the people and not the president, and that's what's being eroded here.
Joyce Vance, thank you so much. And Sungmin Kim, great story here. I mean, we didn't know. You told me something I didn't know, and I think we ought to know this. Up next, party elders on both sides of the aisle are taking on President Trump and his divisive brand of politics. We'll get to that. Every one of these four people we're looking at has been taking shots at the president on his behavior. Not all of them saying they're talking about him. Of course, Joe Biden, not being nuanced, said he's talking about Trump. That's next with the Hardball Roundtable. You're watching it. Hardball.